Thanks so much, Jenny. So I'm Piper Cumbo. I'm the instruction coordinator of the Information Literacy Instruction Program at Auburn Libraries. Abigail, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Abigail Higgins. I'm an instruction and student success librarian here. So a lot of my role involves working very closely with Piper in the instruction that you'll hear about. And then the student success portion is engagement, networking with campus partners, and other fun stuff like that.
Yeah, so I oversee the information literacy curriculum in the first year courses, such as an instruction or English composition course, rather. So today, this is our agenda for this discussion that we're going to have with y'all. First, we're going to give you a little introduction to our program, to Auburn University and Auburn University Libraries, and where we were, I guess. So we're going to give you a little background, context, and then we're going to invite you along as we build this bridge. So essentially, we're talking about English composition, first year instruction, information literacy instruction, and a program that when Abigail and I first began our careers here at Auburn University was essentially no more, I guess. So we started the process of building this bridge for this program. And we're going to talk a little bit about assessment for the program and then looking toward the future. So first, we're going to have a survey. So I know a lot of us are coming here as instruction librarians, perhaps at academic libraries that might be involved in these English composition first year experience type of courses. So if you could go to this Slido and tell us a little bit about where your instruction program is. So we're going to take just a couple of moments for that.
And I've also popped that link into the chat. I don't know, whichever is easier for y'all to use.
Yeah, so we have two polls here. So if there's a yes to that question of have you participated in an instruction program that supports information literacy instruction in first year composition courses, then we would like to know if you're currently participating in that program. And we ask that because in the last 5 years, there have been some changes, some notable changes to instruction programs in academic libraries that have historically supported first year English composition courses like ours. So I just, wanted to get us started in thinking through like what the situation is that we're going to talk about here. So it looks like a lot of us have participated in this instruction program, and a lot of us are still. So that's great. So an introduction for our context here. So Auburn University Libraries, first of all, I didn't think to thank the hosts for this. It's wonderful to be a part of this program. Last year was the first year that I knew about this program, about this conference. So it's wonderful to be a participant in it this year. We are a part of Auburn University. Auburn is an R1 land grant institution located in Southeast Alabama. We have around 27,000 undergraduate students. Last year, our freshman class hit some records. We had around 5,935 students. So that's where, we were really starting to kind of look around like, oh no. I know that a lot of our peer institutions are not as fortunate in that regard as enrollment increases for us. So we are grateful for that. But as a small instruction program, instruction team, this is daunting. So we're looking at this increase and it's just going. So additionally, we had 1,200 transfer students come in, which was a 9% increase from fall 2022, which is wonderful. As Abigail had said, her position is in student success support, and that is meant specifically to support transfer student initiatives. And my trackpad is not working. So here we are with our information literacy, right? So information literacy is a student learning outcome at Auburn and one of 9 student learning outcomes that's supported in the general education core curriculum. So all of our students have to have completed or mastered information literacy as a student learning outcome. And the course that requires it, that where the library is involved the most historically, is our English Composition 1120 course. We have 4 courses in the general education core curriculum that have information literacy as a required curriculum, but that English 1120 course is the one where you will most likely get information literacy instruction from a librarian. In 2021, we assessed our student learning outcome A, information literacy, by the TATL. And some of you may be familiar with the TATL already. For those of you that are not, this is an ACRL standardized achievement test. So here the acronym is Threshold Achievement Test for Information Literacy. And it's measuring the achievement of the information literacy education outcomes. So for our student learning outcomes, the 9 that we require, each year, graduating seniors have to enroll in a course called SCORE, and they take the standardized test or turn in the student learning object or artifact that will complete this requirement for whatever student learning outcome it is for that year. And so for 2021, it was information literacy's turn. Additionally, that was the year that I was hired. So I got to come into Auburn in this role just as the seniors, the first cohort, were completing the TATL. So I got to see these scores upon like the first month that I was here. We had a 99% compliance rate with this test. Students are required to take 2 of the 4 modules in TATL, and each institution can determine what the scores look like. And so for ours, we wanted our scores to be out of 2000. So you can get a sense here of, for each module, what the cumulative scores were, or the average scores, sorry. So if students score, they must score above 250. If they're below 250, then they have to retake the module. Let's see. And here's a little bit more about the TATL. So these were our real takeaways from that first cohort. The correlation of ACT scores and your TATL score was significant, in the sense that, especially for when we're looking at like the Auburn freshmen, so students that began at Auburn scored overall higher, much higher than transfer students did. And we could see that, additionally, this was supported by their ACT score as well. So our students, the ACT score average continues to climb at Auburn. And so if you are trying to get into Auburn and your ACT score is below any of these here, really, you might have to go to another institution and transfer in. So we saw that with the TATL, that our transfer students, their TATL scores were a little lower than our incoming freshmen, or our students that had started as freshmen rather, and the students that had the lower ACT scores. So knowing this is where I began to create kind of an intervention in the information literacy program here at the libraries. Historically, our relationship with the English composition program was very strong. And I still think it's still, it was still strong when I started, I should say. When it began in the early 2000s, the instruction librarians that would do instruction in the English composition courses were also the subject liaisons. So we had around 12 subject liaisons that would undertake, and they were required to deliver in-person information literacy instruction. And so this continued along up until around 2018. So you can see in this timeline, in the 2000s, our relationship with this program, with the English composition department specifically, was very strong. In 2016 to 2018, their leadership shifted. And so they began to get new coordinators for the 3 sections that support English composition 1120. So of those 3 sections, you have GTAs that are teaching in their last year of the PhD program, and they are supported by an English composition coordinator. You also have lecturers, so you're going to have just lecturers and also senior lecturers, and they are supported by an additional coordinator. And then you'll have adjuncts and English faculty that teach additional English 1120 courses, and they are supported by the English department's chair. So you have three managers, essentially three coordinators for this program. And in the spring semesters, when we have the most English 1120 courses, you could have around 90 to 100 of them. And so historically, we had subject librarians, instruction librarians going in these classes, having 1-2 sessions a semester throughout this timeline up until 2018, when the leadership in the English department began to shift. The reason that in-person instruction was no longer a part of this program was not because of the leadership in English composition shifting, but due to new leadership at the libraries. We had an instruction coordinator that looked at and really examined the labor involved in this program. We were having several librarians retire, and so we had essentially no longer the support really needed for all of these courses. And so the decision was made to pivot to online modules and also training the trainer. So when I began in 2021, I became the new coordinator. The English composition program got a new coordinator for the GTAs, for the PhD students. They have a new chair in the English department as well. And Abigail joined our team in 2022. So in that 2-year period, a lot of change occurred. And so we have a new direction. So post 2018, 2019, when the decision was made to pivot to just train the trainer and have modules in these courses, in the LMS courses, this is what those modules kind of looked like. So we had articulate software where we could have the standalone tutorials created that could live on our website and additionally live in the LMS. We use Canvas, as I mentioned. And so this integrates really well in Canvas. We also got a subscription to Credo's information literacy module suite. And so we have those to embed in these courses as well. In addition to those two components, like we can create a LibGuide that has a tailored kind of instruction flow. We can assign additional modules. We can create fresh modules for the class. And then we had the Train the Trainer guide that had lesson plans ready for these instructors, for the English composition instructors, to deliver the information literacy curriculum and instruction to their classes themselves. So it was an investment away from the librarians, from the in-person, and just heavily put kind of in place on the English composition instructors. And so that was where we were up until 2021. So in 2021, I joined, and this is when the statistics kind of started to shift. I'm not saying that the numbers of instruction sessions are all that matter here. I think that we lived in that world for a while as instruction librarians, where we looked at the numbers and like, oh, look, I've done this many classes, and then the burnout starts to occur. And so I think that's really what we were seeing here. There were well over 100 sessions that I could see in the historical statistics of this program. And then once the Train the Trainer program became in place for the English composition GTAs and lecturers and faculty, that shift began to take shape, and it was no longer the library's instruction program. It was just out there. I should mention at this point too, in 2021, so the 7 sessions that I had, I'm this one librarian. These were GTAs and, well, no, not GTAs. These were lecturers that learned there was a new instruction librarian, and some of them were new as well. And so we became kind of aligned in that regard. So additionally, we had an interim department head that decided, well, you know what? This is a genie that needs to go back in the bottle. We need to go back to in-person information literacy instruction. And so that charge was put on our department, on the instruction program rather, and on me to develop this relationship, redevelop this relationship, build this bridge, and revive this program, this in-person instruction program. Now, I was new, and I was but one librarian, and there were only 7 sessions. So the first year, admittedly, it was like, oh, okay, well, maybe this is, just, it's not going to be instant. Additionally, there's a new English composition coordinator. And so, there was this effort to align with her and her program and see if we could, begin anew. So we began building this bridge. I began building it first with the lecturers in the that were part of a different coordinators section, but I had met them at lunch. I had met them at workshops. I sent emails, anything to try to get back in this classroom. Auburn at the time was putting a big emphasis on, COVID's over, you got to get back in the class. And so there I was. Now, the subject librarians that joined me in the research and instruction services department were not as eager to get back in the classroom in this regard in the English composition program. They had been a part of the early days of the 100 plus sessions a year. And so they were quite happy and content to assist with lesson plan development for the train the trainer, and possibly thinking through what modules could look like. They had a lot of suggestions for that, but they weren't quick to volunteer for these in-person instruction sessions that might be coming. With the English composition coordinator, with that role, I was able to meet with her and begin this conversation of, what can this look like so that we can build something better, and we can start with your cohort, this group of, usually averages about 20 GTAs that are completing their PhD program here at Auburn. And that last year they have to teach, and they have to teach the English composition courses. And so at the time, as the new English composition coordinator, she was beginning to develop a new curriculum for her cohort. This genre exploration curriculum that Abigail is going to talk us through. So it was really exciting. All of a sudden, like, Abigail is on board. She is our new instruction and student success librarian that supports our academic partnerships and aligns the library with student success initiatives, and also additionally helps with creating the learning objects, the artifacts that are going into these courses for the modules, for the tutorials, as well as working with partnerships that support transfer students upon entry at Auburn. So we were excited. We were a little scared, but we were excited. So Abigail's going to take us through the next steps.
Great. Thank you, Piper. Yes, so I get to talk to you now about how we went about integrating our information literacy instruction with this core curriculum that particularly those GTA-led sections of English 1120 were teaching students, because we wanted to be able to be enmeshed in that program so that we would essentially become indisposable to them as that program grew and developed. So next slide. All right, So starting in spring 2023, because spring is when those English 1120 classes are most heavily taught, we have English 1100, which is another part of that core composition program, but students actually mostly get to the English 1120 in the spring semester. So that's when we see our heaviest load of students. And so that's when we started working with this. At this point, it was a pilot program of those GTAs led by the new English composition coordinator that were trying out a new curriculum with this very much aligned with the writing across the curriculum movement, to where they're trying to explore disciplinary forms of writing, examine the rhetoric and the styles that are used in potential career fields or subject areas that students might want to go into someday. So the part of the syllabus that we were aligned with, which the English composition coordinator was great in sending us the full sequence of what all those students were going to be doing, so we could see how their learning was going to develop over the semester. But we were specifically aligned with, at that point, it was project number 3 that they were working on in the semester. And it was this genre exploration assignment where students had to find a piece of writing, a piece of information just on the open web, not necessarily something that's scholarly, but something that might be an example of a piece of writing that someone in a particular discipline would produce. And so our role in that was then to help the students think through, when you're finding information just out there on the open internet, not all information on the internet is good and reliable. So how do you really evaluate what it is that you're looking at? So we wanted to help them think through just general web source evaluation, kind of critical thinking skills, and a broadly applicable information literacy subset there. So that's, oh, sorry, we're still on the previous slide. So before we got to the class, we also had a pre-class reading that we assigned to students to read. It's the 4 moves. If you're not familiar, I've linked that in the slides here. But that's essentially, it's an article chapter that talks about different steps you can undertake when you're trying to evaluate just claims made online, and such as checking for previous background investigation work and fact checking that's been done, finding better sources, and kind of finding upstream sources. So sources that maybe are a little bit closer to the production of facts and knowledge than the blog or the news article that you're reading. So we had students read that piece theoretically before class. And then we also prepared a LibGuide for them that contains some resources and tools kind of mapped onto those different moves of investigation that they might take. So you can see that in the slides here, some of those tabs aligning with checking for previous work, figuring out what sources are reputable, and kind of other resources that we intended for students to be able to refer back to as they went throughout doing that project over the semester. Right. So next slide. All right. And so then in class, this is a bit of an overview of our lesson plan that we would do for the students, which I won't spend too much time on. But essentially, when we got into class, we really wanted to immediately have the students think about why we were there. As I'm sure all of us are familiar with one-shot sessions, sometimes you can come into the classroom and you see a bunch of blank faces and students don't really understand why you're in the room talking to them instead of their instructor. So we always tried to start out with telling them explicitly, we are here to help you with some tools and resources that you will use for project 3, for this genre exploration assignment. So we wanted to make that just clear to them why they should listen in the class. And so then we would always then start with having them think about the prior knowledge they bring to the table, and the kinds of information evaluation criteria they use just on an everyday basis. We would do a quick think, pair, share, and have them come up with different criteria of what they might look for when they're reading information online, just to kind of help them feel a little bit more that they are a part of this conversation and we're not just talking down to them, these librarians coming in and telling them what to do. And so then we would get to reviewing those 4 moves of steps you might use to apply the criteria that the students had just come up to collectively as a class. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but this is where things would sometimes get a little bit of a hiccup, because if you've ever had students do a pre-reading or a pre-assignment before class, you probably know that they don't always actually do that or complete the reading. And so we were finding that oftentimes we would ask students, tell us one of the 4 moves that you read about, and we would get a sea of blank faces. So we did adapt this lesson plan in previous and following semesters, but usually if nobody responded and suggested anything they had read about, then we would kind of fill in the gaps. And then to make this also an active session, we would walk through some activities where we would collectively, after the class, look at an example of a piece of writing online and have them apply some criteria of evaluation. And then we would segue into helping them find better sources through library resources and talk about keywording. Some of these classes, which complicated things, were 60-minute and some were 75-minute. So for longer classes, we would do perhaps an additional group activity just to get them more engaged in actually working as a group to find information and evaluate that. So to go through another step of applying what we talked about. And then briefly, we would just wrap up, and there was on that LibGuide that we provided to them, there was a brief little quiz asking students to answer a question about an example source that we provided, just to see if they were tracking with applying some of those evaluative criteria. All right, next slide. So that was the first semester that we had gone through the process of working with this new curriculum. And then so as of then, actually this should say summer 2023, my apologies, because summer 2024 has not happened yet. But so last summer, then the English department was in this stage of solidifying this new curriculum and taking it from the pilot stage into something that was available for not only those GTA instructors, but also lecturers and other English faculty to adopt in their courses. And as they moved into that more permanent phase of this new curriculum option, the English department hosted this Core Composition Assessment Institute, where they invited faculty and lecturers who teach English 1120, and then also very nicely of them, they invited myself and Piper to attend this workshop as well. And really what this consisted of was 2 days of everybody in a room thinking about the impact of core composition, kind of what's worked well about it, what hasn't, and what it should look like in the future. And so it used this appreciative inquiry and provocative propositions framework where they take the vision of what is, so how the program currently stands, and you try to bridge that with what steps you need to take to move it into the future. And so takeaways from that for us was it was really interesting to see just all the English people in a room with their different visions of how this program should look going into the future. And it allowed us to think about how what we might fit into the sequence going forward. So continuing to be in this genre exploration stage. And also, if we all remember, that past spring was also when AI started to become a big thing. So some future lesson plans for English 1100, the previous part of that core composition program, we started to think about some ways we might get involved in that as well. So this was just a chance for us to see the whole picture for that English curriculum, to meet some people, again, just trying to build those bridges to the English department, and get people to invite us into their classroom, and just to kind of strengthen our role in that program going forward. All right, next slide. So moving into this past spring 2024, and again, I left fall 2024 out because we don't see as many students then. Spring is our really heavy instruction load. So with spring 2024, this past spring, we continued with that genre exploration assignment. That was the context in which we were initially going to come into the classroom. And we did make that change of removing the pre-class reading, and we made a couple of adjustments to our lesson plan, which we'll see on the next slide. So in class, we stuck with the think, pair, share activity to where we're having students generate the criteria of evaluation they already use in online contexts. But instead of using that for moves article, we used, actually, it's by the same author, but the SIFT acronym of information evaluation. So teaching students to walk through these steps of stopping, thinking about what they already know about a subject, investigating the source of the information that they're reading, finding better, upstream or more scholarly types of coverage, and tracing claims, quotes, and media back to their original context. So we would walk through that acronym and some different tools that students can use to apply these different steps using their criteria of evaluation. Again, we stuck with, sorry, go back. So again, we stuck with the group activity of applying these to an information source we had online. So we still had them learn how to use the library, very brief keyword demonstration, and our discovery service is what we use for our libraries search. And then so at the very end of class, you'll see also this bold change. Rather than having on our LibGuide and quiz that we pointed them to, we went more toward an open-ended, seeing if there were any questions, because we had built in some activities throughout to really give them the chance to practice. All right, next slide. One change, though, that we were able to implement in this past spring that we count as a big success is that we actually got to come back into the classroom twice. So we saw the students 2 times that semester instead of just once. And this was a victory, though it did involve a lot more, a second wave of, teaching 15 to 20 classes a week for both of us, which was fun. But we were able to come back in as the students were approaching their final project for the semester. Essentially, Piper had conversations with the English composition coordinator and some of the other lecturers in that unit, and they had at this point realized that students needed help. Number one, synthesizing the sources that they were finding, and then also identifying scholarly sources. So for their final project for this course, students have to put together a public awareness campaign, making their audience aware of some sort of issue that they want people to know about and take action on. And so this is a multimodal project, so it's not just a research paper that they're writing. And so they do use a lot of popular sources for this, like we had already talked to them about, but there is the addition with this assignment that they have to have at least one scholarly source. And instructors were realizing students didn't necessarily know what that meant. So our role for this second session was to come in, talk to students about what scholarly sources are, how you might find those using the library, and then also to think about synthesis. We used another acronym for that, which is BEAM. So that's thinking about how sources can serve as different functions. So they can serve as background sources, providing context, exhibit sources, providing examples or evidence, whatever the thing is that the students were talking about, argument sources, providing a perspective on a topic, and method sources, talking about a way of analyzing a problem. And so we would help students think through defining scholarly sources. And this image I have up here on the screen is an image that I used in my sections to talk about the difference between journal articles versus a journal versus a database that students are actually accessing sources through, because instructors were also identifying some confusion between source types. And so really, we were just trying to help clear up some of that ambiguity and help students be able to go into this final project prepared to take all the sources they have found, know what it is they were actually looking at, and put those together. And then so we also allowed time for them to practice that too. All right, next slide. And I think this is you, Piper.
It is my weird Paul Rudd Genie that thanks to Adobe Firefly, like the prompt for this one was a genie coming out of a lamp that's laughing, and suddenly it's Paul Rudd. So you can see here our statistics, they changed a little. So as Abigail came on board, and we began inviting ourselves into discussions, and then they began inviting us into discussions about instruction in these courses. We started to have, well, I guess 2023, we had to ask one of our colleagues for help, basically. One of the subject librarians said that they would be happy to help if we needed it, and we certainly did. Of course, they all want instruction on the same week, the same 2 weeks. And so that was really our biggest challenge. And this spring, we saw 2 sessions in each course. And so, yeah, it's just going to continue to grow from here. So I'll let Abigail take the next.
All right. So given the increase in effort in being physically back in those classrooms, like Piper said, over those couple of 2-week periods where we would finish our day having taught 4 classes and completely exhausted. When you're putting that much effort into something, you kind of want to make sure that it is worthwhile and that it is having an impact. So throughout this process of trying to get back into the classroom and revive this program, we really wanted to measure what we were doing to make sure that it's matching instructors' requests, it's matching what students need, and that we can align our efforts in the most effective way going forward. All right, so next slide. So this is backing up a bit to fall 2022. So before that first semester that we were in the classroom with the English 1120 new pilot program. Before we got into those classes, we sent out a survey, I believe it was that previous October, asking instructors about what they were already doing. Since Auburn does have that student learning outcome of information literacy, and that is something that the English 1120 and 1100 courses are mapped onto, instructors have to make sure that outcome is being met somehow. And so we sent this survey to all of the instructors who were listed in Banner, which is what keeps track of our courses at Auburn, who were listed as teaching one of those courses, and just asking them, you can see the question here, does your course offer lessons on information literacy? And if yes, how will you or do you administer the information literacy lessons? You can see we didn't have a great response rate. I think we sent that to between 80 and 90 people and got 6 of them to reply. So you can see that 4 of those people said they do offer lessons on information literacy. 1 person said maybe. So maybe they didn't exactly know what that meant. And 1 of them said no. And then so we had these then 4 comments on how people were actually going about administering information literacy. Kind of in this variety of ways here. So at least some of them were aware of resources provided by the library, including some of those modules that Piper talked about earlier. But so we just wanted to know what people were already doing, and so we could shape our efforts going forward. So next slide. All right, and so these screenshots that you see here are then spring 2023. So after we had gotten into those classrooms back in person during that one time a semester with those GTAs primarily that we were teaching for. And so we asked a range of questions about the timing of the session that we came in for, it being aligned with Project 3. That was pretty early still in the semester. I think that was in mid-February. And so it wasn't at the very end of the semester. It was while students were kind of being introduced to what they were expecting to do in this course. We asked questions about whether the instructors thought the students were using the tactics we provided, what they found helpful or wish we had talked about. And we continued to ask things about what instructors might be doing apart from us to implement information literacy in these courses. And then finally, you'll see we wanted to know about how confident instructors were in students' discovery and use of sources. So we sent this survey to instructors who were teaching English. And then if you'll go to the next slide, Piper. We adjusted the survey slightly with some of the questions we asked, and also tried to survey the instructors who were listed as teaching English but had not had library instruction in their course. So the English 1120 instructors who had not invited Piper and I in. We still wanted to know about what they were doing. And so we adjusted the survey a little bit, but just asked generally about what they were doing in their class to implement information literacy. And we also included surveys for both of those sets of instructors to send to their students, asking about their students' perceptions of their abilities to be successful on their assignments using information literacy tactics. All right. And in response to these surveys, so to all of the English instructors who both taught and did not teach English and students in those courses, we got a grand total of 3 responses. We had 2 responses from people who did not have Piper and I in the classroom, and 1 response from someone who did, and no student responses. So we got crickets in response to this attempted assessment in spring 2023. Yeah, but going forward on our next slide, we did have some success then this past spring due to some changes in how we delivered the surveys that we were trying to ask people to respond to. So this past spring, so this last month of spring 2024, again, this is where a partnership with the English department really paid off, because Piper was able to get the English instruction coordinator to send out along with us and sign on to an IRB with us. So when we are sending out now our surveys to the instructors, she is backing us up and asking them to please fill this out. And her name is on that email, on that IRB, so they can see that, oh, this person who is supervising you is asking you to complete the survey. And that really helped our response rates. So I believe this past spring, we had responses from 10 people who did not have Piper and I in the classroom. And I believe from 6 who did have us in. So we would still like to see this response rate increase, but it's definitely a lot better than last year and gets us in the direction of having some useful information to assess with. And so we're still in the process of analyzing some of these results. Again, we have an IRB in place that includes both of us as well as the English composition coordinator. But some early results of things that just jump out to us are, it's interesting, this gap between instructors' confidence and students' abilities to find versus evaluate sources. And then on the next slide, we still continue to ask things about what they might like the library to provide as far as additional resources. And you can see people mentioning things like videos, online tutorials, and workshops, which that data helps us have kind of some ammunition for our efforts in developing resources going forward as we're communicating needs to our administration. So that's all helpful to have evidence of the demand. And then on the left-hand side here, this is at least encouraging that instructors did think that our instruction was helpful. So if we're thinking about, was it actually useful for us to be in the classroom? The English instructors thought that, yeah, probably. The students maybe used 1 or 2 or possibly several of the tactics that we introduced. So that is from the instructor viewpoint of things as to what the impact of our instruction was. And then next slide. Rather than having the instructors send that end of semester survey to students, just because students get so many surveys at the end of the semester, for getting students' feedback on the value of our instruction, this semester we focused more on in-class surveys. So making sure to, at the end of a session, have a QR code to where students could respond to what is essentially a 1-minute paper, like you see here, asking them what they learned, if they still had questions, and if there's anything that they wished we would have talked about. So this gives them, from the instructional side, it gives them a little chance to reflect on the lesson, which hopefully can help with retention, but also gives us data to analyze about those sessions. So next slide. So I administered this survey in all 37 sections of English 1120 that I taught, and got 276 responses of various usefulness. Really students are echoing to me what I talked about in the answer to what they learned, which I kind of made a big word cloud here of the things that they heard me talk about. So great, they were listening. I'm still on the fence, honestly, personally, about how useful a question this is, just because, again, they're telling me in one sentence what I just talked at them about. But it is at least helpful to know that some people were paying attention. If we'll go to the next slide. This is probably the more helpful element of that kind of in-class survey, which is them being able to ask questions. So you can see just some examples of those here. They are asking pretty in-depth questions at some point. So they are curious about what we're talking about. And I always then would, after each class, I would follow up via email to the English instructor answering those questions. So it's a way to continue conversations with the students and also continue to those conversations with the instructors as well. So this is probably the bigger value of those in-class surveys to me. All right, and next slide. And so as we continue to evaluate the effectiveness of our program, we have, again, that IRB in place to where we'll be taking a more in-depth look at some of this data from the instructors and the students. And then what we're really excited about is analyzing student work samples. So we actually have just received the end products that the students were working on, so we can see the sources that they're using and how they're able to apply the principles that we talked about. And so that is kind of our next step in assessing, did this actually make an impact in students' learning? All right, next slide.
So we do have a little survey, another survey, asking you all, what assessments are you using if you are involved in these information literacy, English composition, first year writing kinds of courses? We've had a lot of discussions here about assessment methods that we can use that are consistent. And it seems that even I use something different than Abigail does in some of these sessions. And so we are looking for something that is just uniform, consistent. We all use this method in an English composition course. But assessment is really important. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with us what assessment methods you use, that would be great. And there's the QR code, and I know we're almost out of time, and I want to have time built for questions. So I'm not sure why it's not showing us anything there, but looking toward the future. So moving forward, as Abigail mentioned, we have in English Comp 1100, which is the first course that students will take in the fall. They have an AI generative assignment. And so I've developed a lesson plan that should help them with keywording, and it will combine some elements of AI. And we haven't really finalized that. This was like 2 weeks ago that we got the assignment, and we're working toward that this summer. Broader implementation of this new curriculum is expected. We have, again, we have 3 different tiers of the English Comp program as far as the instructors go. And so there are some instructors that are very married to the traditional research paper, and there are some that are eager to try this genre exploration curriculum. So that's exciting. And we're hopeful that, like, as we move forward, we're developing more of these digital learning objects that can be implemented, integrated in the Canvas courses, in the websites with our academic partners. We're looking toward more collaborative efforts and creation and distribution of these tutorials and modules that will help kind of fill in these gaps for information literacy instruction here at Auburn. Am I missing something else here? Let's see. We do have a Padlet, though, again, we don't really have that much time, but if you feel like sharing with us what your instruction program looks like, if you've been through something similar where you had a program that was heavily involved with first year writing, first year composition, and maybe you decided to take a step back and pivot to something different, or you're considering that now. If you wouldn't mind sharing that with us, that would be great.
And there's a link to that in the chat as well.
And I do want to move us toward questions. So thank you so much for your time, and please let us know any questions that you have. So someone asked the 3 librarians. Yes, so that was one of our subject liaisons. She was heavily involved in the early stages of the English composition information literacy instruction program here at Auburn. And so she was eager to get back in the classroom. So she has helped us. Just one, though.
And I won't speak for Piper here, but if you do have questions afterwards, feel free to email me and I assume Piper.
Yes, please. I would love to hear from you.